Hello and welcome back again to WJ Live, powered by The Western Journal. I'm George Upper, editor-in-chief of The Western Journal. I'm joined today on my right by associate story editor Deborah Van Kempen, not Van Helsing, although
you got it right.
That's tempting.
That's very impressive.
It's very tempting.
I always forget it and just default to Van
Helsing.
Helsing.
Yeah. It makes a nice B choice. Yeah.
And what was your maiden name?
Kill him.
Isn't that perfect?
We don't
Deborah
talk
Killam
about
Van
it.
Helsing.
It does not get any better than that.
I know.
And on my left by Deputy Managing Editor Josh Manning. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the so-called stimulus bill that increasingly appears to be anything but. The recent decision by the Senate parliamentarian, mostly so that we get to use the word parliamentarian, because that doesn't come up very often, to stop the $15 minimum wage provision from the stimulus bill, or to strip it, rather, I should say. And a perennial favorite on WJ Live, the topic of global cooling. But before we get to that, I'd like to ask you for your support, as we often do on the show, but it will not cost you a dime. If you're not watching us on YouTube right now, I want to ask you to find us on YouTube. It's really easy, youtube.com/WJLive. And if you're already there, great. You have one less step to do. You're already there. Click the subscribe button and then click on the bell next to it so that you're notified every time a new episode of WJ Live gets posted on YouTube. Like I said, it will not cost you a penny. It does demonstrate your support for Christian conservative news and commentary, which we try to bring you every day here, Monday through Friday. And it will also drive the Silicon Valley big tech tyrants nuts. They hate it when you show support for us, just like they hate it when we show support for you. So you get to do both. Show us some support and kind of poke them in the eye a little bit. Show them that we will not go gentle into that good night, no matter how hard they may try to censor us, to quiet us, to keep us down. We're not putting up with that, and I know you aren't either. Something else not going gentle into that good night is the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill. Yesterday, however, the Commerce Department reported a 4.1% GDP growth for fourth quarter, which was a slight revision upward from previous estimates of 4%. And 2020, according to some experts, may see overall 6% GDP growth. Some folks are saying this quarter could be 9%. Either way, we're potentially rivaling the great 7.2% GDP growth we saw in 1984 under Ronald Reagan. We see durable goods orders up. We see retail sales up. We see home prices up. The economy is doing surprisingly well. So why then this bill? Why stimulus? What are we trying to stimulate? Some of you will immediately go, well, it's for my $1,400 check. That was supposed to be a $2,000 check. And yeah, of course, some of it is that. It's about $422 billion in this thing. Almost a fourth of the amount, 25% of the amount, goes to those $1,400 stimulus checks. But let me list off just a couple of other things that it pays for. There's $109 billion to increase the child care tax credit from $2,000 to $3,000. There's $81.5 billion to rescue unfunded pensions. I don't have any idea what that has to do with stimulus. Child care tax credit I can kind of get. There's $129 billion to reopen schools. My favorite part of that is that $68 billion was slated to schools last year, and $4 billion of that has been spent. So they're already sitting on $64 billion, and they're looking for double that amount again, which explained to me how that's stimulus. And then $246 billion for unemployment benefits to raise those for $400 a week for people who remain unemployed due to pandemic-related reasons. Again, that one is at least arguably stimulus-related. So keying off the whole unemployment argument, I mean, I am kind of a traditional conservative in the sense that I don't really believe that unemployment insurance is a function of the federal government. I don't see anything in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights that guarantees unemployment benefits to somebody who is out of work. And frankly, I think the founders would have scoffed in derision at the idea of paying people for not working. Certainly not a biblical concept.
Right.
Also, I'm not trying to be uncharitable. I'm just saying that because certainly people are down on their luck. They have problems, whatever. I certainly understand that. People need help. I have no problem with people needing help or people getting help. The government requiring at the point of a gun me to provide that help, however, is another question. However, unemployment's been a thing for 80 years. That's not going away. I'm not going to try to fight that battle today. But it does raise the question of, should conservatives even support a relief bill like this? It's hard to stand up and say, that, relief? No, I'm totally against relief, which is why they name it that way. Mm-hmm. But should conservatives support a relief bill like this? And if not, what should we get behind? Is there some sort of economic relief, stimulus, something that as conservatives we could get behind?
Yeah, so hyper-targeting something like this, that might be useful. There are still people who were waiters and waitresses who cannot wait right now. There were busboys and busgirls who can't bus.
Are bus girls a thing? Are they a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, there
Okay.
you
I was
go.
a bus girl for a little bit.
Were you? Okay,
Yeah.
see?
Yeah.
Vampire
Don't
Slayer,
disenfranchise her.
killer, bus
Bus
girl.
girl.
We're
So
learning
there's
all
still
kinds of things
people.
today.
There's like we have some good friends who are restaurateurs, and they're hurting, and the people who work for them are hurting.
Sure.
There are some hyper targeted groups that could probably be helped by something like this, but not to the tune of this amount. And I think the comment about 4% GDP and then potentially 6 or better. I mean, that pretty much says it all. The economy is really trying to get back where it needs to be. The thing that's in the way is the lockdowns, and maybe that's another option too. They could tie this relief to reopening states. Now that's counterintuitive. You say, well, gosh, they reopen the state. Why do we need the aid? But at this point, I think I'd probably be willing to spend $1 trillion to get the rest of the dadgum states open.
Right.
Maybe that's money ultimately well spent. I don't know. $1 trillion is a lot of money.
That's an interesting idea, Josh, because the ones that aren't opening, and I'm looking at New York and California primarily, but of course there are others, are the ones demanding federal relief.
Yeah.
Because they don't have the tax income, right?
Right.
Because their businesses are shut down. Tying that federal relief, I don't like the idea of giving them federal relief at all. But if it were tied to their meeting some reopening steps or whatever, that would make it a little easier to swallow.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you've got a lot of people who are behind on rent, and
Sure.
landlords are people too, despite what the media wants you to think. And getting rent caught up and things like that would be a good thing as well. So I think there's a version of this that's a conservative could swallow. Just kind of grin and bear it, maybe. But yeah, essentially, this is they promised relief. The Georgia guys promised $2,000. That got national attention. 2,000's everywhere. I want to know where my 2,000 is.
You already got
Lord
600.
knows I have paid so much more than that in income tax over the years. The whole relief element of this, giving people a check back, I could not care less. But yes, please make it more, absolutely starve the beast. But yeah, and who knew? By the way, who saw the parliamentarian coming to the rescue on this? I did not expect that. Getting some of the fluff out of this, getting some of the what are essentially earmarks out of it, that is good. Pare the thing down more, give people more money back. I'm fine with that.
Deborah, what do you think?
Well, I think ideally we want government to be small. As you were saying, as conservatives, that's what we believe. Smaller government is happier people, or should be.
Right.
And so we don't want the U.S. government shelling out trillions of dollars that it doesn't have, and whether that's by borrowing it from other countries who we are already indebted to,
Yeah.
or just printing it, which is also not the most fabulous idea. But, of course, there's always going to be struggling people in America, especially small businesses right now, people that have been out of work for months, and people that are homeless especially. And, I think that ultimately it's my belief that it's up to churches, it's up to nonprofits, it's up to charities and other organizations like that to really take care of those needs rather than the government. Because we know from experience that when the government gives you something, it expects something back,
Right.
whether that's money or whether that's just more power to the government.
Well, that's an excellent point to keep in mind through all of this.
Yeah, it is. So maybe if there were some way to incentivize or not incentivize, that's the wrong word, because churches and nonprofits already have plenty of incentive to do that work, right? They don't really need the government going, hey, how about you help homeless people?
Right.
But some way for a government agency to support those efforts as opposed to trying to work in parallel with them
Yeah.
and doing poorly. Universally, they're going to do poorly compared to volunteers and nonprofit people who are just passionate about this.
The reminder that the cheese in the trap is never free is a really good one, though.
That's true.
That's very good thinking.
So in 1960, our federal debt was about 50%, 53% of our GDP. And that's really important. The number, people like to throw out, well, our federal debt now is approaching, it's right at $29 trillion, if I recall correctly. And that's before this $2 trillion bill that I'm sure is unfunded. But that number needs context for it to make sense, right? Like if I have a $2,000 mortgage, that means one thing if I make $40,000 a year. It means something completely different if I make $400,000 a year, right? Those are two completely different situations. And the federal debt is the same way. Some level of federal debt is almost necessary just to, for cash flow purposes. But in 1960, it was 53% of our GDP, or 53% of income would be a way to look at that. 1980, it had dropped to 35% of GDP. In 2000, it was way up to 59%. Somehow the peace dividend got us in tremendous amounts of debt.
When did it hit 59? I'm sorry, 2000?
Year 2000. 21 years later, the federal debt is 130% of our GDP. It is everything that the country produces and another third of that. That's how much the federal government owes. And again, that's before this 1.9 trillion stimulus bill. So that's going to shoot that up even more, obviously. What is fundamentally wrong with Congress that prevents it from taking action to rein in this ridiculousness? What is the thing or the few things that need to change in Congress to get them to stop mortgaging the future of this country?
Well, you could inversely tie the amount of money the value of their portfolios to the national debt such that as that comes down, they can have more money. Yeah. That's one thought. You could also do that with their salary or something like that. The problem is there's no, it's an eternal problem. There's no incentive to do anything about it because the gains are tangible in the moment, whether that's an Obama phone or a $1,200 stimulus check or whatever. And the payment for that is pushed way on down into the future. The problem is that the gain is just you're getting a super small payoff for what you're going to pay in the future, both in terms of the amount with interest, but also what it will do to the currency. In the Weimar Republic, they had 8 or 9 years of incredible inflation. 8 or 9 years of financial troubles, and then in 1 year, the mark got down to it went from the point that it was a viable currency to the point they were having to take wheelbarrows to get
That's right.
a loaf of bread.
It cost $1 million marks to mail a letter.
Yeah, so it's not, you don't pay proportionately. For one thing, if you borrow $1 today, you don't just pay $1 later, you pay $1 plus interest. But it also turns out that it's not really paying $1 plus interest, it's paying almost an unpayable amount. It creates a catastrophe later on. And we're just kind of pushing the catastrophe back, and we can continue doing that for a while if that's what we want to do. That's fine. But the longer you hold that back, the longer you pin that up, the worse it's going to be. How we get out of it, I'm not sure. I mean, you can devalue the currency, and then you fix that problem, and then the dollar's not the reserve currency anymore.
Yeah, you
and,
got a whole other set of
yeah,
problems.
and then your debt's no good. Of course, we only owe a couple of trillion and a trillion or two in foreign debt, I think. So maybe that's not that big a deal. But yeah, that's an enormous issue. And then what do you do with petrodollars? So I don't know the answer to this other than finding some way, and people have written about this, find some way to tie how Congress people, how lawmakers are compensated to how the economy is doing or how the national debt's doing. That's the only dadgum thing I can think of. And of course, that would have to be done by law.
Written by
and
Congress.
they're not going to do it.
Right.
So one super long answer to the question you asked, but maybe one thing to think about. One of the things that made the contract with America work was the idea that Gingrich and his crowd said, look, any law Congress passes will apply to Congress as well as everybody else. Doggone it, we're not going to exempt ourselves anymore. If you could get a movement like that among conservatives, then maybe you could get enough people in there who would say, oh, look, we're going to kind of stick it on the line here, and we'll run the risk of not getting paid what we thought we were going to get paid if we don't do our jobs. But that's there's only ever been one contract with America.
Right.
It's hard to pull off.
Deborah, if you could change
Yeah.
one thing about Congress to address some of this, what do you think it would be?
I think when I look at this, it points me back to the fact that we're beginning to allow more socialist principles into our country and into our leadership in Congress. And I think that our leaders that are now in a Democratic administration that for a period of time at least was being heavily influenced by progressives on the far left is beginning to take the mindset that the government should be able to give people whatever they want, whatever they need, whenever.
Right.
And that's not the principle that America was built on. And that's not, I don't believe that's not the standard that we want to strive for as a nation moving forward. And so I think that because of that, the current administration does not have any plans to limit the federal budget at all or to even have federal spending in the back of his mind. I think that for them, as the national debt continues to grow, maybe even by the minute, it's a problem that is far off, out of sight, out of mind for them.
Right. No, you're absolutely right about that. And by the way, if you want to watch the national debt grow by the minute, by the second even, I think it's nationaldebtclock.org, I think is the site. And it's got a ton of different tickers on there, and they're all running at the same time, and you can see how much you owe, what's your portion. Maybe you don't want to see that. But you can't look at it for more than a couple of seconds without thinking, good night, we got to get our arms around that. If this were my personal finances, it would be a disaster. And the only reason it's not a disaster is because there are men with guns who keep it from being a disaster right now.
That's true. One other super quick thought on this. I've been on the air with you guys, have been worried about the future of the country and are we going to be able to stay together and this and that. And I'm more optimistic about that than I have been in the last few months. But it does occur to me one enormous incentive. If enough people decided, man, we are sick of what's going on in D.C., let's get out of Dodge. One enormous incentive is that they could walk away from that debt. To the extent that debt is there,
Nice sales
the federal government is incentivizing people to leave, which is not good.
That's a really good point. Well, this $1.9 trillion may add to the federal deficit, but one thing that will not be in that stimulus bill now is a $15 minimum wage.
Right. So in a Thursday hearing, we saw the Senate parliamentarian announce that the inclusion of a $15 minimum wage hike in the proposed COVID relief bill did not meet the Senate budget rules, and so she nixed it. And that kills the idea of raising the federal minimum budget or the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour that so many Democrats were pushing for. And so while this news kind of delivers a hard hit to that proposed section of the relief bill, it was also reported that Senator Joe Manchin might attempt to modify the amount to $11, or that Democrats might bring the issue of raising the minimum wage in a regular order rather than in the relief legislation. And so, but that likely doesn't have a chance of passing the Senate either, since they need a 60 vote and Republicans are not on board. So I just wanted to kind of open up for discussion. We've talked about raising the minimum wage before on the show, and one of the arguments that we made was that it would be hugely detrimental to small businesses who, you know, have largely borne the brunt of this pandemic by being forced to shut down, by being forced to completely restructure their business plans, you know, by losing employees because they weren't able to pay them, and just all these different things. And so would not a federal requirement to raise minimum wage effectively kill a lot of small businesses in the U.S.? And, you know, what does that say about what the left thinks of small businesses?
Yeah, sure it would. It would it would kill some. It would drastically change others. We did a story a couple of weeks ago about a guy, I think in New York, who said, you know, my $12 pizzas are going to go to $22 pizzas, something along those lines, because he doesn't have any choice.
Yeah.
What the left thinks, some know better, but what a lot of people on the left think is that all of these business owners, and when they say business owners, they're thinking about huge multinational corporations.
Right.
They're not thinking about the dry cleaner down the street. Yep. And they think that all of these business owners are just taking wads of cash out of their company and putting them in their pockets. And maybe that's true at large multiple multinational corporations. Certainly we know CEOs make, you know, 7-figure, 8-figure salaries and bonuses and incentives and that kind of thing. Whether that is good for the company or not is a wholly separate question. What it's not true of is the dry cleaner down the street. It's not true of these folks who make donuts around the corner from us. They are not pocketing wads of cash that, oh, I guess I can't pocket this anymore because now I got to pay my staff $15 an hour. It doesn't work that way. Those costs, let's even back up from that. There's no such thing as a corporate tax, okay? Only individuals pay taxes. Now, corporations write the checks, but then they increase their prices, so you pay them, and they pay the government. The federal minimum wage works exactly the same thing, exactly the same way. They have to raise prices, which gets passed on to you, the person now making $15 an hour. Yeah. Who now has to pay more of that money out for literally everything they buy: gas, groceries, clothing, literally everything they buy. Any home improvement they want done, anything they spend money on is going to cost more now. So federal minimum wage is really largely self-defeating, in that all it does is all minimum wages, not just federal. It gives you more money that you are now going to need to spend on the things that cost more because you have more money now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we've sort of tied the idea of minimum wage to unemployment, but it's actually one step removed from that. It's not the minimum wage that directly causes people to be fired. It is the minimum wage causing the price to go up, which causes the consumer not to buy it.
Yeah.
Which means
lose their job.
Means the company can't pay its employees. So that's what it's not like. It's not like CEOs or business owners get together and say, "Oh, when they do it, we're going to lay them all off. We can't wait." It's not that. They want to keep their staff on
Right.
on
they want to
hand.
grow.
Yeah.
Every company wants to grow.
But you've got to have sales to grow
Right.
and to keep people on. And it turns out if you have fewer sales, you can afford to have fewer people, especially when they're more expensive people. And of course, it's just an insanely regressive scheme in that it really, really, really punishes people who are less educated, have fewer opportunities, and who are already generally on the lower end of the totem pole. And whether that be minorities or whether that be folks starting out or what have you, it hurts those people the most. Right. Really, the people they can least afford to hurt. So, yay to the parliamentarian.
People they claim to be helping.
Yeah, and this is interesting. You said a second ago, not all leftists, think this way, and I agree with you. I think there are some useful idiot leftists out there who really think, hey, I'm going to help this guy. Yeah, these people need help. They need a living wage. We're going to help them. And those are useful. And I don't mean that insultingly. It's just the term for it. They're useful idiot leftists. The other leftists who advance this idea, and I think there are more of these people than we normally note, they know full well what it's going to do. They know that it will swell the ranks of the unemployed. They know that it will make business privately owned business look heartless and like they're profit grubbers, and it plays right into the Marxist narrative, right? And so the more, unemployment's a good thing for those people. Unemployment's a very good thing. The more people you can get unemployed, so's COVID, the more likely they are to go out and find sharp sticks and torches and go revolt, which is exactly what the left wants. So there are some well-meaning but useful idiot leftists in the midst of this.
Absolutely.
And we need to try to help educate those folks. The others are extraordinarily dangerous, though, because they actually want it to fail. Mm-hmm. And that is something that's worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, and it really kind of it makes me fear for a lot of small businesses that if they somehow manage to pass this in the future, that are going to be shut down because they just won't be able to afford paying employees. They won't be able to afford production anymore. And so it looks like, as it stands, the minimum wage option is not going to pass the Senate in the relief bill. But do we think that more moderate Democrats like Manchin, or do we think that others in the future are going to try to introduce this minimum wage bill again in a separate piece of legislation?
Oh, yeah, until the sun, its successive journeys across the sky ends. Yes, they will do it eternally. Yeah. It is, and it's the same. It's what I said a second ago. There's a group of people out there who are very nice and well-meaning, and they think, good gosh, why can't we just do this for the people? And there's another group of people out there that says, good gosh, let's do this to the people, because then they'll do what we want them to do.
It's a constant dilemma between conservative and progressive, in that the progressives only need to win that battle once. They can just keep bringing it up, keep bringing it up until eventually they've won that battle. Conservatives have to defend every time. Well, we have to win that battle every time. That's why the Western Journal's here, to be a part of that battle, to help equip people with the truth. As you just said, Josh, it's about educating people. Not just on the left. Sometimes it's about, those of us on the right are just as much wanting, and perhaps more, wanting to help people who are, in a rough spot.
Because we can look down the road and see what's going to happen.
And helping to educate and equip people with truth so that they understand what really is helpful versus, what's just kicking the can down the road, or what's actually looks nice, feels good, will make things worse over the long haul. Helping to equip people with that understanding is really important. At the end of the day, minimum wage is a grift. It is a way to bring individuals to the table and say, look what we gave you. And then when the person who's selling you the pizza raises their price, that's their fault. But I gave you minimum wage. It's a grift. It's a classic grift.
Yeah, I think that is completely true. At this point in the game, that's 100% true. If you go over to westernjournal.com, we actually have a really interesting piece up. Just search minimum wage. It'll probably be the first piece that comes up. But Jeffrey Tucker, who's a libertarian economist, he wrote a fascinating piece, and we noticed it, and we decided to run a little bit of commentary on it, tracing back the origins of the minimum wage back to the early 20th century.
20th, yeah.
And, we didn't have one until the 30s. But leftist economists, socialist economists, were suggesting one as early as 1917, probably before then. But they loved the idea of that because it would create unemployment among those who were and this is a direct quote from a textbook at the time, who are the undesirables. So,
Oh, man.
Jews, Irish, blacks, Catholics. Man, yeah, it's going to make sure those folks never get a job.
No reason to feed them.
There
Right.
was a quasi-eugenicist take on the minimum wage at that time, which is just absolutely fascinating to me. It is remarkable how many things the left pushes today actually kind of came out of that Fabian socialist kind of background.
Yeah.
And people today would have no idea. I mean, Joe Manchin, I think Joe's a good guy. He probably thinks an $11 minimum wage would be great. I think he'd probably be horrified if you said, hey, Joe, this was designed really to hurt black people.
Yeah. There's nothing new under the sun.
There is nothing new under the sun, but things do get repackaged, and that's what this is.
And and that's a grift, too. The repackaging is a grift.
Yeah.
And speaking of grifts,
Hey, global warming.
climate change is another
Climate
grift.
change. So back, you talked about the 1960s, 1970s a minute ago. Most of you guys are in the know. If you're watching this, you're the kind of people who know this sort of thing. The big climate scare in the 70s.
I remember it well.
Time magazine, front page. Global cooling is coming. Good.
The new
Lord, we're all
ice
going to
age.
freeze to death.
It was billed as the new ice age. I remember that I was probably 10 when that came out, somewhere in there.
That and the population bomb. Paul Ehrlich's really stupid book that said by 20 years ago we were all going to be fighting over food.
Malthusian thinking.
Just ridiculous. So, hey, I got good news for you, man. We went from global cooling to global warming to climate change. Global cooling is back, baby, and it's back in a big way. Let me tell you.
I could get those old T-shirts out again.
You can get
Back in
those old
action.
T-shirts out again. Well, not for long because it's going to be awful cold
That's right,
out there,
it's cold
George.
for T-shirts. True.
Right.
So we're working on a commentary piece on this right now, but I wanted to bring it to you guys before we even got finished. Scientists are saying that the Gulf Stream is in danger. The Gulf Stream, that thing that helps move warm water to colder places and keeps currents going and these things, all of this ecology really is tied together. They're not lying when they say that. It's not as fragile as they say it is. But they say it is dangerously close to a tipping point because of, you guessed it, pollution. And we are facing potential. It may become the weakest it's been in over 1,000 years, though they say we have only been able to collect data for the last little bit.
I was just about to ask how they knew how strong the Gulf Stream was.
Large amounts of inferential data.
Yes,
George,
okay.
inferential data,
Right.
which is it's just absolutely absurd when you're thinking in terms of hard science. But anyway, at its weakest,
that's not hard science.
and of course, it's due to climate change, and it could plunge Europe into a deep freeze.
Well, that's where all the undesirables are anyway. So,
yeah, apparently, man, we hike up the minimum wage in Europe, hit them with this
freeze
stuff.
them out.
Yep. It's all good.
We're back in control.
So the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, that's what this is called.
Impressive.
AMOC, AMOC.
Somebody got paid.
The
to come up
AMOC,
with that.
according to the UK Daily Mail. It is an ocean current, moves warm water from the Gulf of Mexico to the UK by convection in the ocean. It's the driving force which brings warm water up from the Gulf, and it's responsible for the nice mild winters in Europe, Western Europe. It's a very nice thing. But since the 1950s, they say it has been weakening significantly. That's very interesting because they note that it began weakening 100 years before that in the 1850s, and the pollution was not nearly as rampant then. But it began then, so we're not positive why things changed.
I guess you could make some industrial revolution kind of argument there, but okay.
Yeah, but I don't buy it.
Well, it's nothing compared to today.
Exactly.
But it would have been different compared to 50 years
before
prior to that.
Well, and there's an absolutely fantastic line in here. Oh gosh, I'm not sure if I copied it down. I don't think I did. Where they talk about the last time we saw this was something like 12,500 years ago, I think at the end of the last ice age. And they did note that it is unlikely that humans were responsible for that.
Oh, okay. Well, there's
At that point, human pollution probably not responsible for the ending of the ice
Probably
age.
not.
maybe
We
not.
That might have been 120,000. I can't keep up. The time frames are so absurd for these things. But anyway, George called this a grift because that really is how we view it. Is the climate changing? Well, sure it is. It's to the extent that the planet is small e evolving over time.
Sure.
Yeah, it is changing. It will always be changing, whether or not it's a result of man's actions. That's up in the air. Bjorn Lomborg, who is a Swedish, a Dutch, I think, statistician and ecologist. He says, yeah, it is happening, but it's really not happening the way that the left says it's happening. If you project out into about the year 2100, it looks like if you take climate change out of the mixture, it looks like the world's going to be about 2.7 times wealthier or so by the year 2100, about 2.7. If you factor climate change back in, brace yourselves. Instead of 2.7 times wealthier, climate change is going to make us only 2.5 times wealthier.
Oh, man. What are my grandkids
And then
gonna
Lomborg
do?
points out the thing.
Actually, my grandkids will mostly be dead by then.
Lomborg points out the thing that is truly striking when you think about it. The left loves to talk about, oh my gosh, the ocean levels are going to rise, people are going to be killed, and of course the direct implication there is that they're going to drown. I'm fairly sure if ocean levels rise even a foot or two, it's going to be hard to drown in that. And it's going to be very hard
You'd
to
have to
drown
be
in
working
that
hard.
over a period of 80 years. Who stands there?
It's possible, but it takes real determination.
It takes
drown.
real. You got to be
Understand.
very
Water,
determined, and so, and we are making light of that a little bit, but essentially that is the point. It's like, yeah, you're right. A whole lot of people are going to die if they don't move over 80 years, and that's pretty much true anywhere.
Which is what makes it a grift.
That's exactly right.
That and
Exactly
the fact that three of the people who I can think of who have been most vocal about rising sea levels, Barack Obama, Al Gore, John Kerry, all three climate change alarmists, I would even say. All three of them in the past decade or two have bought oceanfront property, have spent millions of dollars on oceanfront property. That is a grift. That's a grift. You listen to what people say. That's fine. That's great. You should do that. But watch what they do.
Yep.
That's where you will see what somebody truly believes. And if you are buying oceanfront property, and not, I'm not talking about a mobile home on the beach. I'm talking about, $1 million estates here, multi-million-dollar estates. Those people don't believe that property is in danger. The end. They don't. Not anytime soon.
Yeah.
So they might believe that 80 years from now it could be in danger. And their response to that is, I'll be dead in 80 years. Why do I care about that? Which is the correct response.
The
That's
other
the right response.
The other fallacy involved in this is that we are presuming that the ecological situation on the planet right now is optimal anyway, and that this should
Exactly.
be
We should
paused.
preserve it.
Yeah, and when you look at the warming projections, especially since they're based on CO2, you actually end up with more fertile, more arable land, more fertile land. Biodiversity increases actually with, they've done a number of studies on this, decreases as temperatures go up, and biodiversity decreases as temperatures go down. So if you want an actually flourishing biome, you want it to be warmer. So anyway, all of this, it's kind of the two divisions that we talked about a second ago with global warming. You've got a group of people out there who are just thinking, heck, I'm just worried about the planet. And I went to the lake and I saw a bunch of trash in the lake, and that's no good. And you're right,
Yeah.
that's no good. That's
right.
We need to
We
clean
should
it
do
up. That's
something like
terrible.
that. You're right.
That's terrible.
Yep.
That's one group. But there is another group who knows that this is not, that the projections, the wild projections, are not going to happen, and they keep touting them. And let me tell you who the biggest group doing that is. It is the media. It is the establishment
Exactly.
media. And I want to talk about that sometime next week. But anyway, one quick question for you guys on this. So, just really the climate projection, the climate forecasting industry, those guys, did they have any credibility left? Ted Danson said, we were going to, it was 8 years until life was over as we knew it because we were overfishing things. That was back when Cheers was on. Cheers has been off the air for almost 30 years,
yeah.
almost 30 years now. Do these guys have any credibility left?
Of course not. It's just fear mongering at this point. It's exactly like you said. It's a tool that the media is using to create more fear mongering and to tell people that you need to get your life together. And there are people that live on Earth. Of course, the climate is going to change. And, one of the things that Bjorn talked about in that interview that I thought was really great is that he said that rather than just calling out doomsday all the time, we need to consider some good options in terms of technology that we can begin to develop that will be ultimately way more useful than people saying, well, I need to reduce my carbon footprint, And so, and of course, that doesn't involve spending all of these billions or trillions of dollars that some people want to spend on climate change. It involves a significantly smaller amount that we can spend on that. And so, there's just so much more that we can do actually in the way of research than we do by just spreading fear.
Great comment.
It's another situation in which legislators can legislate things that will not in any significant way affect them directly, even if they don't write themselves out of the bill. It's like a incredibly complex tax code, right? Who doesn't pay taxes? Rich people don't pay taxes because they hire accountants whose whole job it is to figure out how to make their clients not pay taxes. Poor people don't. They don't have the ability to do that. So they actually bear the brunt of that. It's the same thing. Carbon offsets, for instance, are the same thing. I can, if there's some sort of carbon footprint limit placed, well, if I've got enough money, I can buy offsets for that. I'll hire somebody to plant a tree.
Right.
And so it's not me. I'm not affected by this. It's a few more dollars out of my checkbook. Are checkbooks still a thing? I don't, do people still get that metaphor?
A little
even?
bit, yeah.
I can't remember the last time I wrote a check. So it affects me, but it doesn't change my way of life. The way it affects and changes the way of life of somebody who can't buy a carbon offset and therefore has to reduce the amount of carbon that they're putting out into the atmosphere or whatever the argument is.
Yeah, or someone in sub-Saharan Africa who relies on a really crappy, super polluting truck,
Right.
so that he doesn't have
everything.
to lug, hundreds of pounds around every day. And hey, we're going to take your truck away from you, but don't worry, it's going to make your life better, dude.
Yeah.
It's just not true.
In 80
it's
years.
just in 80 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not true. It's horrible to say that to somebody.
It is.
Horrible.
So we are running out of time, actually way past running out of time.
Hold on for just a second.
Today.
If you would like to buy carbon offsets, I offer a service. I'm more than happy to plant a tree in the desert for you.
Yes.
You can contact me through the
It
Western
won't last
Journal.
long,
Might
but
not
he will
grow very
plant
much,
it.
but yeah.
We do, before we go, we do have actually a special treat, a very quick message from Joe Setian, our deputy managing editor, another deputy managing editor, who is this week with a team from WJ at CPAC down in sunny Florida. He promises me he's not spending all his time at Disney, and he sent us a little video, I think, mostly to prove that. So I think we have that ready to go.
Hey everyone, I'm Joe Setian, Deputy Managing Editor for the Western Journal, and we are here covering CPAC 2021 in sunny Orlando, Florida. So far, we've already talked to a host of big-name conservatives, including Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford, former Utah Representative Jason Chaffetz, and Black Guns Matter founder Maj Toure. We have a lot more interviews scheduled and coming up, including with hopefully Senator Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, as well as Senator Rick Scott from Florida, and hopefully a lot more on the docket. CPAC, as you can tell, is bustling. Everyone is socially distancing and wearing masks. People are following the guidelines set in place. But the one takeaway that we have for you is that, contrary to what you may have heard from the establishment, mainstream media, the conservative movement is not dead. There's a lot of energy surrounding CPAC this year, and we will be bringing a lot of that energy to you in the days and hours to come.
All right. Thank you, Joe. He will be back right here live in studio next week, along with Crackerjack reporter AJ Shawshaw, to discuss their many interviews and all of the goings on at CPAC this week and this weekend. So you will not want to miss that. We are here every day, Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, and we will bring that to you next week. Bringing that to you costs us money. I don't think that's going to be a shock to you. And there is a way that for just a few dollars, you can support us and help us to do things like send this team to CPAC and bring you that news. It's very easy. Go to westernjournal.com/join. westernjournal.com/join. That is our subscription page, and you'll see a number of different options there for subscriptions. None of them is an arm and a leg. They're all cheaper than carbon offsets, I promise you. And they bring a heck of a lot more value. You support good, honest journalism, content that we write and bring to you from a decidedly and determinedly and unapologetically Christian conservative perspective. We're going to keep doing that for as long as the powers that be let us do it. You can help us by joining with us to support us right there at westernjournal.com/join. That is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for being here on this Friday afternoon edition of WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. We will be back next week. See you then, and stay safe.
Hey guys, huge story. We need a fresh card. Let's red label it. Roll as fast as we can.
All right, on it.
Sounds good.
All right, guys, we got a red label breaking story. Can we get a picture for that? And can we try to get that out in the next 20 minutes? I want eyes on it as soon as possible.
On it, Joe. 2 more minutes and we'll be live.
Sam, we're going to need a slot for that story, so figure out what you want to bump. Ashley, we're going to want to translate it into Spanish yesterday.
Sí, señor. We can slide it in at 2:30. It should be going out here in about 10 minutes.